with that, I will turn it over to our board chairman, Jim Tuckwell.
Thank you, Kathy. Welcome. Good evening, everybody. Before I introduce Ben, which we'll do in just a few minutes, I didn't know if everybody that would be joining us tonight would be familiar with the Vilas County Economic Development Corporation. So I'd like to take just a few minutes to kind of share with you who we are and what we do and what our mission is. So we're a 501c3 nonprofit. We were formed 10 years ago, 2010, and we've got a straightforward mission, and that is improving the economy and quality of life here in the Northwoods and specifically in Vilas County. Compared to other economic development organizations around Wisconsin, we're relatively unique in that we have a dedicated volunteer working board of directors, not an advisory board. Our board is very dedicated. We have a diverse set of skills and experiences, and we span all across industries and cross business disciplines, from marketing, high tech, manufacturing, commercial construction and real estate development, finance, education, research, and many others. We really focus on having a very diverse board. We have gender diversity, we've got age diversity. We actually have 3 millennials on our board, which has been extremely beneficial for our organization. We ensure that we have geographic coverage across the county. We have 2 county representatives, and we have also Lac du Flambeau tribal representatives on our board, and representative from the Wisconsin Economic Development Corporation. We've got a strong partnership with Nicolet Technical College, and we're very fortunate to have Dr. Richard Nelson, the president of Nicolet, on our board as well. Over the 10 years of our existence, we've developed a documented track record of success, helping area businesses succeed, and now we're executing a strategy to take our contribution to the next level. We're very fortunate to have Kathy Schmitz as our executive director. She joined us in this role in January. And our priorities are to continue doing what we've done to help local businesses, but and in particular, we are focusing on leading an initiative to expand broadband coverage, high-speed internet throughout the county. This is absolutely key to our future. We are expanding the outreach that we began in February with paid social media and Google advertising. We're enhancing that with paid Google ads and expanded paid social media advertising to recruit entrepreneurs, expanding businesses, and remote workers to Vilas County. And lastly, but certainly not least, and this evening's event is a part of this, we're working to build a welcoming community to business people, and this event is an example of that. Building a stronger organization from our page of our website, this says it all. This nets out our mission. And we have a strong list of services that we offer, as you can see here on this slide, and we offer all of these free of charge. And these leverage not only Kathy's skills and experiences, but the skill and experience of all of our different board members, as well as other volunteers from throughout the community. As I mentioned, high-speed internet is the foundation of which we can build our future. This is critical to the future of Vilas County. Broadband is the great equalizer. It lets anyone conduct business anywhere in the world from anywhere in the world. So that opens up Vilas County as a haven for knowledge workers. Now it's my great pleasure to introduce Ben Winchester. Ben is nationally recognized, and he's a senior research fellow with the University of Minnesota Extension. We welcome Ben as he presents Rewriting the Rural Narrative, the Brain Gain of Rural America.
Great, thank you, Jim. Thank you, Kathy, too, for all the support you've given to your community there through the organization and the talents that you bring together on your boards. Hello, everyone. Happy Wednesday. My name is Ben Winchester. I'm a research fellow for the University of Minnesota Extension. Once I tacked on senior, it made me feel a lot older, even though I don't feel a lot older. Though I have to say, I've got years of experience doing research, tromping around the country, trying to figure out what's going on in rural communities. That has been my passion. That's been my love I went to school at the University of Minnesota Morris, which is out on the prairie in western Minnesota, in a town of about 5,000 people. And I had grown up in Winona in southeastern Minnesota down by La Crosse, and then moved over to Morris. And it was really during my time in Morris, I started to realize how easy it was to get involved in small towns and how to make an impact in small towns with the skills that I've got when, initially it's just, well, I'm just, 21 years old. What can I really do here? And I quickly realized how much of an impact you can have as a single person, no matter what age you are, as long as you have a passion and interest in working for your community. So really, thanks for having me here. Hello to everybody who's here. Hello to everybody who will be watching this recording. All right, and we got folks who might be out on the lake today. So I hope they're enjoying their time. I really do. So it's good to have you all here today and interested and passionate about your communities. So my own background in my undergrad while I was in Morris was in math and statistics. I'm a data guy, I love data. But really a lot of the data that you see kind of presented to you in the broader world is very confusing, and you don't really, it's hard to traverse some of the data out there. So hopefully everything you see here today will be consumable and understandable at the community level. All of the topics that you see brought before you here tonight have come from topics that small towns want to research. So really, this is where the beauty of my job, right? I work for University of Minnesota Extension, which many of you know Extension is the 4-H people. I'm in a different sliver of Extension, but we have gotten to really keep our pulse on the changing nature of our rural communities and find ways to enhance what we've got in ways that may look different than it looked before. So I'm going to start sharing my screen here. 1 second. So we see that we've got this this title that I use, which is Rewriting the Rural Narrative. And my premise behind everything you're going to hear tonight really is that the narrative we're using to describe our small towns and our rural places is terrible. This is not a speculative fact. This is a speculative nature. This is really everything I've seen in 30 years of research, how our communities get described. Not necessarily by us, even though we use some of this negative language. Like many of our small towns we get written about us, and we don't really have a hand in the narrative that gets written in our small towns. And you'll see the subtitle here is Speak Softly and Carry Statistics. Again, I've got data to bring to bear on all of this. I'm an academic with a community hat on, so I'm always trying to balance, what can we make consumable at the local level, while at the same time ensuring we've got a level of quality with regards to the research that we do. So you'll see the picture here is like, welcome to the middle of nowhere. This is like part and parcel of the negative narrative that we've got. Like, where do you live? Like, I think to a lot of people, if I talk to people in the Twin Cities, I had lived in a small town of Hancock, Minnesota, a town of 700 people for a long time. And in many respects, it was a lot easier to, when people ask like, oh, where do you live? like I couldn't just say Hancock because nobody knew where that was. And I could barely say Alexandria, Minnesota, because nobody knew where that was. I would have to say it's, 2.5 hours west of Minneapolis, St. Paul. But a lot of times we just kind of go, well, I just, live in the middle of nowhere. And we think that that's okay. And I'm going to kind of make an argument that we have to kind of be careful about the words that we use when we describe our small towns and rural places. Now, there has been really a renewed interest in rural. You've all heard about this. We've been tracking roughly 400,000 people have moved out of New York since the pandemic hit. There's been this renewed interest in urban and rural living, especially by folks living in the metros. And there seems to be, as Joel Cocken identifies, this revival of the heartland as this pandemic hits. But in many ways, I want to remind you that there was a world just 6 months ago. And I'm going to talk a little bit about what normal was 6 months ago, but I use the Star Wars quote because it seems like so long ago that we had some sense of normalcy that I just want to kind of take you back to where we were to understand some of these rural trends and the places that Vilas County has ended up in as a result of the progress that we made over the past couple of years, really 10 years. So what is this narrative? And I kind of talk about this when I first started my job. I was the very first employee at an organization called the Center for Small Towns. And it was there to serve small towns, right? And I would tromp around the state, like working with small towns. And on one hand, I would hear this narrative, like small towns are dying. People keep leaving rural America. Small towns are playing a role in their own demise, which is troubling. From breadbasket to basket case, which is an extremely disrespectful statement to make about an entire swath of the country. Or the poster child for the war on poverty. Like we end up with a lot of characterizations of rural that just don't don't have any accuracy to them today. But again, this narrative is not new. And I heard this when I started to do my work, and I had comically kind of told my boss at the time, like, boy, if I'm working for the Center for Small Towns and all these towns are dying, am I just going to be a critical care assistant to help our small towns die in a respectful way? Like, you know, like first we're going to get rid of the hardware store, and then we're going to get rid of the grocery store. And like, right, I mean, right, it doesn't make any sense. But everything that I heard on the ground tended to not match this narrative. And this became my life's work, is trying to understand the differentials between the stories that are told about us and everything that we hear and know on the ground. So we do have this narrative that, you know, there's a brain drain, and this happens literally everywhere, where we have 18-year-olds when they graduate want to leave. A lot of times this is characterized as a real problem for our small towns, but no community is immune to the brain drain. No urban place is immune to the brain drain. Kids want to leave when they, you know, right? They grow up, 18-year-olds, they want to get out. A bunch of them do anyway. And they may go to college or into the military or community college, or just want to go find a job. So meanwhile, there's this term brain drain that's very prevalent in my industry, in this rural development industry. And it is talking about, you know, the negative impact that a brain drain has on our rural communities. And I was like, well, I guess, we're losing our high school kids. I'm not quite sure what exactly that's going to mean, but we're going to dig into this a little bit. We've got also other aspects of this narrative that, you know, where do you live? I live in the middle of nowhere. Or we're characterized as a sleepy town that was woken up by the, you know, name your, you know, intervening factor, you know, a tornado or whatever it is. You see these quotes all the time. Everybody knows one another when in fact you don't. Nobody locks their doors when in fact some people do. So really we've got this narrative being written about us. And a lot of times this narrative is based on what we had, what we don't have, what we wish we had, what we could have had. I end up in many conversations in communities where I hear a story of the past, where it is, you know, 45 years ago, we could have had 3M, or we could have had Land O'Lakes in our community if it weren't for the council at the time, and they didn't rezone the land north of the highway, and now look at where we are, right? So, I mean, 3M never actually seriously looked at your town, but this story was very prevalent in Morris, where I went to school, actually. There was this common story in the community that, you know, they kind of messed it up a number of 40, 50 years ago. 3M never considered that town, nor did they consider a number of other communities I've heard these stories in. So why do we have these stories that kind of lament a bad decision? I argue that we have these stories, mostly untrue, because we don't believe our communities are where they should be. And when we don't believe we are where we should be, we want to try to find someone to blame or some type of event in the past, kind of make sense of where we are today. But really, I want to introduce a term to you called anecdata. Anecdata is information which is presented as if it's based on serious research, when in fact it's based on what somebody thinks is true. This is built off the term anecdote, right? Anecdote is when somebody has something to say, like, this town is terrible. Well, is that a trend when one person says it? Certainly not, right? But a lot of times you can even have 2 or 3 people saying the town is terrible, but that doesn't, again, mean you have a trend on your hands. So really, I'm trying to dig into this data to better understand some of these trends as we move forward. Now, the history of our rural communities is fraught with change, is fraught with dramatic structural changes, right? The mechanization of agriculture alone in the early 1900s reduced the number of farm workers in our rural communities by 20, in some places up to 80%, where no longer did you require these large families or all these workers to work on the farm in the open country. Now you needed only a small fraction of them. So we saw a mass migration of people away from our rural communities in the early 1900s. At the same time that happened, we had roads and transportation systems come in. We literally went from having almost no roads to having roads connect every rural community with one another. So we literally went from Little House on the Prairie and horse and buggy to not Little House on the Prairie in the span of about 12 to 15 years. And this was transformative in a way that it's tough to understand this today. Because we've got vehicles, we're highly mobile populations. But at the time, it was the first time that, if you're in Little House on the Prairie, you live in Walnut Grove, and you want to get to the doctor in Mankato, it's going to take you a day to get there. Well, with a car now, you can get to Mankato and back in a day. You can do your shopping back in a day. And this transformed, again, not only how communities saw themselves, but how they saw each other. I mean, just some other pieces too. We had religious diversity where not everybody in the same in the town was all of the same religion, and then we had ancestral diversity where we very common in our area right here, very German communities that now the Swedes were moving in, and this was a tumultuous time for the community as they tried to progress through some of these aspects of life. So we have gone through these dramatic changes, and these continued up through the 1950s when we started to witness our hardware stores, our grocery stores, our apothecaries close. And again, during this time, you find all these proclamations that if we close our hardware store, our small town is going to die. We're going to close our grocery store, our small town's going to die. You end up with all of these kind of direct line equations of what are the implications of this happening. So this Main Street restructuring, though, happened for a reason. And it didn't happen because, I mean, you hear the laments, like, oh, we should have shopped local more. Well, I'm here to tell you there is almost nothing you could have done at the local level to prevent that grocery store from closing, to prevent that hardware store from closing. These are trends of globalization, and nobody is immune to globalization. The metros are not immune to globalization either. So when you close your hardware store, though, and you're in a small town, it's probably your only one. You close your grocery store, it's probably your only one. And now here's a picture of Sleepy Eye. I think this is the very romantic view that people have of small towns, is that, you know, you've got filled main streets and there's people walking around and there's cars everywhere. And our smallest towns look almost nothing like that today because a lot more people work in our regional centers. But meanwhile, you go up and down main streets today and you find remnants of the past. You find an empty bank building. You find where a grocery used to be. I mean, you hope we turn these over, and we have been slowly turning a lot of these over into new types of businesses, but they look different. But I want to remind you that every time there is a grocery store that closed in Hancock, there's one that closed in Milwaukee. There's more than one that closed in Milwaukee. There's some that closed in Madison. Like, nobody is immune to the effects of globalization. But in many ways, our small towns are canaries in the coal mine. You want to better understand how the world is changing, you can look to yourselves, because we aren't in this, you know, drastic world where trends from Italy take 20 years to reach the United States. I mean, we are finding out about things every day that happened yesterday. So really, as we move forward, for me, looking at the changes we see in our small towns is really a marker for how the world is changing. So when people today harken back on, well, you know, I know we closed our grocery store, we just need to get our grocery back, and that's going to save us. Well, your grocery store is closed for a reason. And so unless you're willing to throw away your family fortune, I think it's going to be very difficult to try to relive the past and to try to rebuild remnants or these characterizations of what we believe rural should be based on what is nothing more than some Norman Rockwellish view of what we think we should be. So in reality, and I talk about in reality is because you have people like within the VC EDC that have to work in reality and on the ground, given the tools that are available and that make sense today. So meanwhile, again, we've got some major structural changes that happened in our small towns, school consolidations too, where you went through, you know, I mean, essentially in Minnesota, we had roughly 20% of all our school districts consolidated. And that means that, you know, Kathy's town where she lives got the elementary school, my town got the high school, right? And now we changed our name and now we're all up in the air and the parents are all like, oh my gosh, what's happening to our community? And then the kids are like, nah, I don't care. I'll just go to this new school, right? I mean, they are so resilient through almost every one of these changes. So this, again, school consolidations, they'll happen for a reason. Again, there's a lot of hand wringing in our communities. We have to be careful about the hand wringing and the blame game that happens, because I heard during this time, this was part and parcel of where I worked in the 80s, was around school consolidations. There was a lot of talk about open school enrollment or, you know, private school digging into this. There were a lot of reasons why people gave for why they think this was happening. But the number one reason why your school is consolidated is the birth rate, right? Your outgoing class of seniors have 20 kids and your incoming class has 12. Well, you just went down 8 that year because we like to look at total numbers and, right, did our total enrollment go up or down? And, you know, it's going down and did go down, though now school enrollment has very much leveled off in almost all of our districts across the country. We've got kind of a new normal with regards to where those numbers are. So meanwhile, we just have all these kind of dramatic changes, and now hospitals or birthing centers are on the radar. And really, for me, there is this broader narrative. This is the challenge, is we have a broader narrative being written about rural that we exist within. And even if we have all the greatest things going on locally, The broader world still has a very idyllic Norman Rockwellish approach to what they should see in a small town. So number one way that I look at is from the federal government. For example, the U.S. Department of, or sorry, the Office of Rural Development. Really, so places that universities get grants, that that we do research on rural communities and try to help with broadband and things like that, or infrastructure. Like even the framing here around the Office of Rural Development, they're housed within the U.S. Department of Agriculture. So literally, it's very difficult for me to even talk about rural communities without talking about them in terms of agriculture, right? Because there is this kind of idyllic notion of what rural should be. But I will tell you that today, just 5% of rural employees work in ag or an ag-related field. Of rural employees, less than 5% of rural income is derived from ag or ag-related fields. So the rural we have today is much different than economic rural that we have today is much different. But when people think rural is agriculture, it definitely impacts the ability for people to see themselves moving to a rural place when they say, well, I'm not a farmer, or like, aren't all the small towns dead? Like, why would I even move there, right? So, I mean, trying to transition people into thinking about actually relocating to our place, the first inhibiting factor is the narrative. And unless we can counter that narrative, we are not going to be successful in overcoming some of these challenges. So a number of years ago, I had worked on a project for the McKnight Foundation here in Minnesota. We looked at how do the metropolitan areas portray rural in terms of the media. So we looked at all the major media in the metropolitan areas of Minnesota. And one of the things, I mean, the report itself was interesting. You can go to the centerforsmalltowns.org and find that media study report. But one of the things that I did as a part of this study was I talked to lots of reporters. And I would ask reporters, like, what time of day did you go to Clarkfield or to our different towns? Well, the average time of day that reporters got out into our rural communities was between 10 a.m. and 2 p.m. Well, who are you going to find in many of our smallest towns, especially between 10 and 2? Almost nobody. It certainly doesn't look like Sleepy Eye just looked. And it might be a very quiet town. So meanwhile, now the reporter drives in, and this was very consistent. The reporter would drive into town. There wouldn't be a lot of people there. They would see these demarcations of the past, like there's an empty bank building, there's the empty grocery, there's an empty school building, and think, wow, this town is really dying, right? And then where do they go? You go to the cafe, and who do you find in the cafe? The folks who remember how life used to be. And this becomes a reinforcement mechanism for how this narrative continues to be written and rewritten without us actually doing anything about it. So one of the more recent stories that we've had is this about, the post offices potentially closing in our rural communities. Have been threatened for a while now, a good 10 years. There's a small town, Calumet, up by Duluth, which one of the major media in Minnesota sent a reporter up to Calumet to talk to people about what's going to be the impact of closing a post office on the small town. And right, like people love to talk to reporters, they'll give them tons of quotes. And what you end up seeing in the newspaper is a very distilled version of kind of all these stories that people have. At the same time, now this story gets posted in a pretty major metropolitan newspaper in the Twin Cities, which is going to have a couple 100,000 readers. And here's what the title of the story ended up being. A lot of times, this is the editor, right? This isn't the writer a lot of times that writes these. But it is the Iron Range town fighting for more than the mail. That's right. Calumet challenges the decision to close its post office, which is a social hub for its residents. And I was literally like, social hub? Like, I never hung out in the post office in Hancock. They didn't have like coffee and rolls there, right? And it's funny, it's kind of funny until you realize how many people just read this. And now how many people are like, the post office? They're like literally hanging out in the post office in this town. So this is the type of characterization that is truly an uphill battle for us when we talk about rural vibrancy. So now, oops, sorry about that. So really my point here is that rural is changing. We're not dying. And really, again, as I mentioned, small towns are just microcosms of globalization. And at the same time, we're still here. Like, you remember those kind of direct line equations? If we lose our grocery store, our small town's gonna die. We lose our school, a small town's gonna die. Well, show me all the dead towns. They're certainly not littering our landscape. I also want to remind you that you have all survived these structural changes with your volunteers. I can't even say this strongly enough, because, you know, all of these changes that we went through, we don't have big paid staffs or big, you know, school boards, or, you know, hire consultants to help with the school districts to do all of this work. I mean, literally, we have had to bear the burden of making decisions through all of these dramatic structural changes ourselves. And we're still here. And you all should pat yourselves on the back for the fact that not only are you still here, but you are more vibrant than ever, because you take an active role in writing your own narrative. So now, what has happened? Since 1970, the rural population hasn't gone down, it's gone up by 11%. You wouldn't know it by the common narrative being used to describe our rural communities, but what's gone down is a relative percentage of people that live in a rural place. So in 1970, 1 in 4 people lived in a rural place, right? 26%. But by 2010, that went down to 19%, or 1 in 5. And how can that be, right? How can that be when the rural population actually got bigger? Well, the red part of the pie did get bigger, but the blue part, i.e. the urban part, got bigger faster. Right? So the rural growth rate was 11%, the urban growth rate was 50%. Now it looks like, and you see this, I mean, every time you look at an article or the way rural gets described in terms of population in the future, you'll dig holes right in it, because it is full of holes in terms of like, oh, people prefer urban living. That's not true, actually. In fact, many of our urban areas become wider and not taller. And why is that? Like, imagine like 40, 50 years ago, around all of your metropolitan areas, they used to be 2 to 3 counties big like 75 years ago. And then they went up to 5 to 6 counties big in the 40s, 50s, 60s. And now it's like in some like Minneapolis, St. Paul, we're 16 counties. It used to always be the 7-county metro, but now it's 16. Well, what's happened here? The story behind urbanization is not about urbanization. It's that people did not want to live in the core metro, so they moved out and they created the first ring suburbs. And then by the time you get to the 60s, 70s, 80s, you got all the folks in the core metro who are like, I don't want to live here anymore. And they look out to the first ring suburbs and they say, well, that's urban now too. And they move out to the second ring. This is a very common demographic trait called a concentric ring theory. So every urban area goes through this in the country. So really, and even nationally, we end up reclassifying counties from rural to urban status. So now, what happens to my rural data? Like when a county gets transitioned from rural to urban status, it looks like the rural population went down. When it didn't, it got taken away from our classification. I hope this makes sense. Literally 21% of all counties in the nation have been reclassified from non-metro or rural to metro, which is now home to 36 million people. This is a very different story about urbanity than you probably have heard before, as well as a different story about a preference for rurality that people have, but it makes intuitive sense, right? As you know, again, our urban areas have grown wider, not taller. So now, getting back to the narrative, like, okay, this was my very first starting point. If rural's dying, why can't I find a house to buy? Like, doesn't that not make sense? Like, we should be noticing this trend, not just in my community, but literally every state in the country. In our rural communities, I can't find a house to buy. So meanwhile, I want to let you know that there's a concept out there that I'm using called total population infatuation. And that is, you know, the sign outside of your county or the sign outside of town that has your population on it. We have an aspiration to grow. We always have this aspiration for our populations to get bigger, right? But if you look at the counties in white, these are the counties that have lost population, i.e. these counties are big losers. Right? I mean, I say this tongue in cheek, right? We got our loser counties in white and we have all of our growing counties, or the preference that we have. So while you in Vilas County have grown from 2000, 2010 and since, all of the counties around you have been bleeding population apparently, which is a very commonly used phrase. If the population remains stable, it's called stagnant. And if your population goes down, it's called bleeding. So, but essentially I want to let you know, I hope you never use, total population as an indicator for your success or failure again. And why is that? It's because over time, you can have your population go down, but the number of households go up. And I first ran across this in Western Minnesota, where we have 5 counties that lost 35% of their population over 40, 50 years. but the number of households went up by 3%. How can that be? How can the number of households go up, but the population go down? The average household size has went down. 1940, your average household size of 3.6. Today it's 2.6. You are going to lose 29% of your population by doing nothing but existing in the modern world, right? But you also end up with these other circumstances that impact both of these characteristics. One is what happens when a household has 2 kids and both of the graduates move out of the county, right? Now what happened? Your population just went down by 2, but the number of households stayed the same. We have a much more common situation today where you've got 2 senior spouses and one of them passes away and the surviving spouse stays in that home. Again, what happens now? Your population just went down by 1, but the number of households stayed the same. When you look at the data for all of the counties around you, while your population change was 2%, number of housing units went up by 12%. Look at Iron County. Again, this is the narrative. Population loss of 14%, but the number of housing units went up by 5%. There's actually more households there. Same with Forest, right? So I hope this makes sense, because a lot of times this narrative is so inhibitive of us trying to have a positive conversation because we are infatuated with these total numbers as if it's an indicator for our success and failure, but there's more nuance to it. So early on, one of the data points I hit on was the number of people that move every 5 years. And here in Wisconsin, 46% of all households move every 5 years. We are in a highly mobile population. It went down for the 2 years before the pandemic slightly, but really it's actually been going like bonkers for the past couple months. So we've got a really migration around a theme around movement that generally we don't think of, because we think of our places as, you know, nobody ever moves in or out as much. You know, we don't know to what extent that exists, especially when you don't know everybody. The narrative is you know everybody in town. The reality is you don't, because when people move in, we could barely know it. I could be pumping gas next to my new neighbor 2 houses down. I wouldn't know it because we don't have opportunities for social engagement like we used to. So there's a lot of work to be done here. So meanwhile, I wanted to look at better understanding. Like, I don't want to use total population. I want to break the age groups out a little bit and look at who is moving in and who is moving out. Now, between any 2 time periods, if nobody ever moves in or out, you're going to have the same people that are going to age. So here, if you have 10 people that are 20 to 24 in the year 2000, then 10 years later, those same people are going to be here, but they're going to be 30 or 34 years old. They're going to be 10 years older. The reality is people do move in and out, right? You got people moving in, you got people moving out. Who you have today is a component of who you were, but also reflects who left and who moved in. So really when I started to first analyze this in 2002, it was, here is the brain drain. So if the bar goes to the left, that means you lost people in that age group. If the bar goes to the right, that means you gained people in these age groups. And so this was the very first chart I made for Grant County, Minnesota, small rural county of about 6,000 people. You know, flat, stable population. But the real story is like, well, obviously there's a brain drain going on. And that is, right now, Grant County lost 43% of their population after graduation. But I was looking at this like, whoa, wait a minute, what is this? You got people in their 30s, 40s, and 50s moving in? And you've also got 10 to 14-year-olds who are moving in, and they don't move by themselves. They're moving with their parents right here, right? So I went back to the literature in the rural development fields. I wanted to better understand this trend of people moving in. And what did I find? Almost nothing. Footnotes, small like 2-page briefs like, oh, apparently there's a gain of people in 30 to 50-year-olds and they're bringing earning power. Like, no kidding. Like, holy cow. So meanwhile, on the brain drain here, I've got stacks of books and articles about the brain drain, lamenting the fact that our small towns are all dying because of this, without a recognition that we've got this. Vilas County, you're not immune to this. You got people in the 30s, 40s, and 50s moving in. You probably already have known this. You do lose young people, and we're going to talk about how to frame the young people brain drain a little bit in a minute. So meanwhile, I partnered up with Nebraska, did research here in Minnesota, have replicated these studies all across the country, and they're very consistent. Rural communities are very consistent in the preferences. People are moving to the prairie, they're moving to the lakes, to the pines, to the mining counties. Like, no place is immune, right? Like, and when we first did this research, people were like, why would people move to southwestern Minnesota? It's nothing but prairie. It's like, well, you know who loves that? Like pheasant hunters, boy. I mean, like, we have a lot of people who actually live on the prairie, and we lived on the prairie in Hancock. It was beautiful. We loved it for what it was. So meanwhile, you kind of get to the idea that we have to be okay with people's different ideas of what cool is. Like what cool is for me might not be what everybody else is defining. So meanwhile, we started to interview we literally found thousands of new people moving into rural communities, and we asked them. So we're defining newcomers, someone who moved in the past 5 years. We found these people in their 30s, 40s, and 50s, and we asked them, why did you move? The top 3 reasons that people gave were a simpler pace of life, number 1, safety and security, number 2, and that was especially high with people with kids, and low price of housing was number 3. And when we explore a little bit more about who these people are, we found just a third of new residents moving into our rural communities were moving primarily for a job. What I mean by this is they were offered a job. They had a job offer in hand and they ended up moving. But put the other way now, 2/3 of rural movers aren't moving for a job. They end up looking at all of these different rural communities, and once they start to narrow in where they want to move, then they want to solidify their job. While many also are already coming with a job. Many do not need a job offered locally because they've already got one set up. And so this is like traditional economic development is around industrial recruitment, right? And that model is jobs are need to be held here, and that attracts people in. Well, this is called the chicken or egg approach to economic development. Do jobs bring people, or can people bring jobs? And if we're in 1930, it's jobs attract people. But we are in modern day 2020 society where we've got, and you all know this, people can choose where they want to live. Just 6 months ago, again, we had a very tight labor market. When you've got a tight labor market, labor's got power to choose. They can move to any town. What's going to differentiate one town from another is everything but the job is going to matter more at that point. So now what we had also found that I want to hit on is just 25% of new movers have lived there before. If you lived there before, so let me start with this. If you haven't lived there before, it's a major struggle because you don't have social networks, you don't have contacts. Like, who do you go to if your plumbing bursts at 1 a.m., right? But and so you've got your own struggles. I'm not saying that people who grew up there and moved away and came back don't have their struggles, because they've got their familial history on their back, right? That they sometimes can't get away from. Like, oh man, I know you moved back here. I always remember that time in 4th grade when you broke those windows in school. And I'm like, I'm 37. Like, why are you asking me about this? Like, right? So anyway, they've got their own challenges. Everybody does. So meanwhile, trying to gain a more accurate understanding for me of who these people really are. Because initially our speculation when we first did this research was that easily 80% of the people moving in had grown up there and moved away and came back. This totally countered our idea on that. And really, as we've been exploring it now for the past 20 years, it's been fascinating to look at the newcomer experience from a true newcomer, someone who has no previous contact there. So also just under a half of newcomer households have kids. We thought that was, again, going to be much higher. So, newcomers with kids, they're easier to see. It's like, hey, there's a new kid in my kid's class and there's their parents, right? But I'll remind you, every time you see a newcomer household with kids, there's another that doesn't. And they, again, may be very hard to see. And I had shared this story this morning too, but I tell this a lot because it makes so much sense when we're in the upper Midwest especially, is that, right, for 6 months out of the year, it's dark when you get up in the morning and dark when you get home. You wouldn't know it if somebody moved in across the street until the spring. And then you're like, hey, Bill, what happened to Bill? I thought Bill lived across the street. Like, I don't know what. And now there's somebody new there, right? So meanwhile, this kind of the darkness, the light is brought to our towns and we start to see things again for the first time. Now, the last point I want to make here is that 14% of workers are telecommuting. This is pre-COVID even, right? And these folks now, what kind of support do they have or do they need? It's obvious. They need broadband. This is part and parcel right where you guys are working on for strategies there. I'm not going to go through all of these slides necessarily. We're going to definitely make these available to you so you can download them and peruse them at your pleasure. But we asked people, what were the preferences that you had when you made the move? And this was the overall value that people had. Take advantage of the slower pace of life, live closer to relatives. And that also, this coincidentally does not always mean I'm moving to the town my relatives live in. It may mean I'm moving to the region as opposed to the town. So again, less congested place to live, similar values like recreation and environmental concerns, things like that. So my point here is that people move all the time. people are moving, the kids graduate, they move to the metro, you move, you meet a spouse or a partner, they move, have kids, you move. Like on average, Americans move almost 12 times during their lifetime. So what is this? I just want to call this the brain gain, right? So on one hand, we have the brain drain, which is our 18-year-olds that leave after graduation. But on the other hand, we have 30, 40, 50-year-olds moving into our rural communities. They're moving during their prime earning years. They're moving during a time that they've got economic, social, and financial networks that 18-year-olds would never dream of having at that age. So it is just a much different perspective to trying to gain a real value around this brain gain and trying to describe it in a way that actually is beneficial to devote resources to it, right? Because many times we don't devote resources to, the good things. We devote resources to solve problems. And this is a bigger message I've got, is that our rural communities, while we have had problems and may still have problems, I mean, you look at how rural is still covered. It's, meth addiction, opioid addiction, homelessness, poverty. And I'm not to say we don't have those problems, but that cannot be the only way we describe our rural places. We need to have a real narrative that frames where we are more broadly. So really what we have found out is this trend of people moving in their 30s, 40s, and 50s is not new even. This has been happening since the 70s. So what we end up finding though is where people locate their homes is different than where people locate their jobs. It's not always in the same place. And really what we find especially is that people live in these very large regions. They live in 1 to 2 hours out from their house where they're going to shop, and we'll look at some of these characteristics too. So getting back to the economic piece of this is that we had done some research here at the University of Minnesota because we really wanted to explain to people that our economy in rural Minnesota, and this is true for just about any region in the country, is that any place in rural, no one place in a rural environment, like no one town is going to have a diverse economy. But when you put 3 to 5 to 7 counties together, you find the same diversity in your economic base, industrial base, your occupational base that you find in the metro. So really, instead of saying, well, I could never live in a rural place, I'm not a farmer, which by the way, farming is much more technological today than ever before. I think people have very romantic notions of even what agriculture is. But meanwhile, we need to get over that mental hurdle. And instead of people believing they cannot be a blank in rural Wisconsin, you fill in that blank with whatever job you've got, because there is literally every job available to people in rural Wisconsin. It may not be in every town, but you've got it in a regional basis. And at the same time, you do have people that commute in and out every day. I mean, every day in Vilas County, almost 2,300 people commute in, 3,500 people commute out, and just, I kind of say just, like, because it's almost the smallest number, right? That both live and work here. At the same time, 8% of Vilas County workers work from home. So this becomes a kind of a different perspective on who you've got moving in and out. And really, there's more implications here I don't really get into, but it is like, how do you do community planning, right? Do you include these people that commute in every day as a part of your community, or are only the people that live there considered part of your community? Well, you've got 2,300 people that every day they come into your county and they call it home. They're there for 8 to 12 hours a day. They shop, they eat, they love your place as much, I would say, as the people that live here. So, but generally we don't include them in our community visioning, community planning. So I'm just going to say, I'll ask you to consider these people at our community in every day and to include their vision in the vision that you've got for the region. So meanwhile, early on when I did the newcomer research, I would hear all the time, well, if there's all these new people in town, where are they? Like, I think social life is dying. They don't want to be involved in any of our groups. Like, well, you're right. They don't want to be involved in your groups, but they're involved in their groups, and you don't really know where they are. So we kind of have to be careful about how we talk about these new people coming in. So early on, I ran across this data set from the National Center for Charitable Statistics. They've got data down to the county level on the number of nonprofits, who these nonprofits are, how many file 990s, how much in assets and revenues you've got. So really basic characteristics. But what we found is while the population from 2000 to 2010 is what I'm looking at, I'm not doing 2020 yet for a lot of really good reasons, but we need to get some controls on this, is that while the population of Wisconsin went up by 6%, the number of nonprofits went up by 29%. Even in the most rural counties in Wisconsin where the population went down by 6%, the number of nonprofits still went up by 26%, right? Vilas County, so I mean, there's a national map too, you can look at your leisure. Really, nonprofits are exploding almost everywhere. I mean, there are only a few counties in white here, but again, just because you lost nonprofits overall doesn't mean you lost everyone. You gained some, you lost some, you ended up in the negative. But here in Vilas County, the number of nonprofits went up by 29%. And that's with a population growth of just 2%. So, I mean, there are implications galore in this chart right here in terms of like, now you've got more groups. You're competing over money, you're competing over time, you're competing over volunteers. And when we look in more detail at the characteristics and the composition of these nonprofits, we see that, yep, the nonprofits have went up. The number that file 990s, which is those that have revenues of more than $50,000 or more than doubled. And really the assets of your nonprofit sector went from 23 million in 2000 to 148 million in 2010. You couldn't ask for anything more. I mean, when I look at this data, this is a wealth of social life that you've got going on. So one other piece I want to pick apart here and look at is in the bottom row here, population per organizational role. What this data tells us is how many people does every nonprofit or any government entity, because you need government leaders too, right? You need appointed, you need elected positions, city, county, township, sewer districts, cemetery districts, all of these different, governmental units need people to serve. Well, what we find is that in Vilas County, 1 in 13 people have to serve as a leader. This is one of the lower rates in the country. And it's pretty telling that really one person per city block has to serve as a leader. Not just, and these aren't people you're going to for volunteers or for donations. These are people to lead. So now there is a tremendous amount of social stress that gets built up because, now I'm wearing 5 hats in town. And I mean, this ultimately, you hear about this, right? About people wearing multiple hats. It's happening. But this kind of stress that gets put on the social structure really isn't well understood. Well, meanwhile, when young people come in, we don't always recognize them for their talents. Even today, I mean, we continue this narrative around the millennials, the lazy, entitled millennials, right? I hope I never hear anyone say this. It isn't true. I want to remind folks, even baby boomers especially, that you were kind of called that too, right? And that now, what are we doing to our young people? Well, I mean, look at this. Look at the covers of Life in New York and Time. Like, we have this, a generation gap, the me decade, 20-somethings, generational warfare in 96. It's all about me in 2007. It's the me generation. Like, this is not, being selfish is not a characteristic of a generation, like it's just the millennials that are selfish, right? This is a function of age. 18 to 25-year-olds, you're pretty selfish, right? And probably rightfully so. You want to find out what path you want to be on life, what kind of job you want to have, what kind of partner and spouse you want to have in life. Like, you have a lot to figure out. So we have to be extremely careful about the kinds of words we use when we talk about these younger people and the motivations and the interests and the talents that they bring to the table. So what has shifted most dramatically is how people get involved. Historically, people would be involved in place-based groups with a broad focus. The Hancock Community Betterment Club would raise money or do community development work for just about anybody in town, but it only helped Hancock. It didn't help Starbucks down the road, right? It just helped Hancock. Today, people want to be involved in just the opposite. Instead of a narrow geography, it's a broad geography. And instead of a broad focus to the organization, it's a narrow focus. So you move from the Hancock Community Betterment Club to the Northwoods Bicycle Association, which encompasses 7 counties worth of people. And what are they doing? They're not doing everything. They're bicycling. Now, that doesn't mean that's all they do. A lot of them do fundraisers, or they do a lot of different work in the community. But these are the reasons why people end up loving life, is because they're involved in their interests, and interests change over time. So the point is, we are regional. We're regional in our jobs, we're regional in our lives, we're regional in our social activities. So we end up with a situation where we do literally live in the middle of everywhere. Where you put your home is in the middle of all these opportunities. So there's a really cool exercise we've been doing in extension here, which is we have people, you create a map of your place, and then you put a star where you live. So this is when I lived in Hancock, right? And I would commute to Morris every day, about 12 miles out. So I would live here, I worked here. And then we asked people to draw a border around how far in the past year did you go to shop and eat out? And this is about an hour away. So it's an hour to the north, hour and a half to the east, hour to the southeast. Like this was our middle of everywhere when it came to shop and eat out. When we ate out, I didn't want to eat at Buddy's Bar and Grill in Hancock every time we ate out. I wanted to go to Benson. I wanted to go to Wilmer and Sauk Center. And we would go all around, and you do this too. You know of all these really great places to eat in all these small towns and all these regional centers in the region. At the same time, then people play and recreate in these large regions too. So this provides a really good visual way of trying to understand how big of a region people actually live in. So really, how do we make decisions while at the same time respecting the reality of lives? Like how do we make local decisions, especially when they're tied to a jurisdiction? Like, you know, y'all are working at the county level, but people don't live at the county level, right? We live in these kind of vast networks of interaction. So for us, the region is really the primary of interest that we look to. So I go back to this narrative a little bit, and there was a study done 11 years ago now, and even then this was not new research, but many people did not see this, is that the Pew Research Institute, they do study on, you know, social opinions and dynamics across the country, and they asked Americans, like, all right, Americans, we know that 80% of you live in the city and 80% of you live in the metro, and 20% of you live in rural areas, but if you could live wherever you wanted, where would you want to live? 51% of Americans said they'd prefer to live in a small town in a rural place. Well, why don't they? I argue the narrative is so negative, they think they never could. We are fighting an uphill national battle, trying to get over the hump with regards to people's perceptions of what we have or what we had or what we should have had. So now we are at really the forefront of the largest demographic change that you're ever going to witness in your lifetime in our rural communities. And when I get done saying this, you can't say you don't see this coming. And that is, today, 40% of homeowners in Vilas County are 75 years or older. Those homes are going to turn over within 10 years. Are we ready for it? Are our homes ready for it? I mean, the bigger question is what kind of condition are our homes in, right? Because for me, a house is a community asset. It's a home while a private individual lives in it, but we hope that that house is going to be a home for someone in the future, just like it was in the past. But we know the kinds of decisions that people make when they're on fixed income and they've got a dilapidated home. There are some serious consequences that can arise if we do not care for this housing stock. At the same time, another 40% of your homeowners are baby boomers. So overall, 80% of your homes are owned by people that are baby boomers or older. And so these homes will turn over in the next 20 years. So when we look at housing units, again, you've got a lot of recreational properties here. They make up roughly 60% of all your properties are recreational. They're not even considered occupied according to the census, which is, you know, this is a data thing. So really what happens though, is with so many recreational properties, we started to do research at the University of Minnesota to better understand what's going to happen to these second homes. And we did interviews and focus groups with these second homeowners, and we asked them, like, do you intend to move to this property when you retire? And a full 56% of second homeowners said they plan to move when they retire, again, pre-COVID. So now we know a lot of people have moved up. So essentially, when you look at your housing data in the next number of years, you're going to see a decline in vacant housing units because you're going to transition them to full-time occupied housing units. And what does that mean for your Main Street? What does that mean for your hospitals, for your clinics? You're going to be busier than ever as we move forward. So really, you can look at, we had created, I just wanted to show these off because this is super cool in terms of like what you can do with your assessor's data. These, so we've got two heavily recreational counties here, Aiken County, which is where I go to fishing opener every year, so I put that in here. And this is where do people live that own a second home in Aiken County. And you look, there's actually people in every state that own property in Aiken County. When you look at Douglas County, Minnesota, here's the county, you know, they each have different kind of capture areas. The Twin Cities is really going to Aiken County a lot more, where Western Minnesota, you're getting people down from the Wilmer area finding properties in Douglas County. So there's a lot of different dynamics around where people are coming from that have second homes in your area. So we have this topic called resident recruitment that really is part and parcel of how we do our economic development work in the future now. we initially had all of these concepts developed out pre-COVID because we are in a tight labor market and we had workforce housing shortages. And really my answer to workforce housing shortage is you don't have a workforce housing shortage. You've got plenty of workforce housing. It's currently occupied by your seniors. And as soon as we find ways to move people over for those that want to, again, that opens up supply. You know, you can't just build homes because you want them and wish them into place. Like lumber prices are 3 times where they were, you know, a year ago. We're in a very different world in terms of new construction. So really, what is resident recruitment? Resident recruitment is a triangulation of community development, economic development, and tourism. Because if you recall, many of the reasons that people say they move to your community are many of the same reasons that people visit your community. So when we start to talk about people, you know, visiting our community, are you really able to translate tourists into residents? Are you actually inviting people in to be a full-time resident in your community? So really, again, labor's got the power to choose. I mentioned this earlier. Why would they choose one town over another? In Otter Tail County, Minnesota, we have the nation's first resident recruitment coordinator. It is his job to work with businesses and HR departments across the county and with local communities to really show potential newcomers what life is going to be like for them when they move here. We always work from the assumption that you're going to move here. So he will literally take them out fishing for an hour. He'll show them the golf courses. You know, again, like, let's time it. How far is it going to, how long is it going to take when you get done with work to drive home, hook up the boat and get it into the water? It's like 14 minutes. That sounds pretty attractive, right? So anyway, we end up with a lot of really great ways to talk about our rural communities, especially when we talk to people that just moved. But really, we need to make sure that we are going to have a reasonable home for people. And when we talk about economic supports, this is where it starts. How are we supporting people with broadband? How do you support remote workers? How do you support self-employed? How do you support businesses that are going to transition from old ownership to new ownership? What I've seen in Vilas County is all of this, right? There are like usually when I give this presentation, it just gives people ideas for things to work on. When I started to talk to Jim and Kathy, I quickly realized you've been working on this for years. Like you guys have been building this technological and social infrastructure that you need to have today to be this modern rural community. And I kind of call this the idea factory because you still have a lot of people who think in terms of factory, right? Well, how do you turn an idea into a business? This is the model as we move forward. This is also how you write your new narrative. You don't wait for a narrative to be written about you, you write the narrative yourself. So what are other things you can do in terms of resident recruitment to invite people in? Hit graduations, class reunions, also tourism locations. Like imagine what kind of narrative is told by your gas station attendant when there's a person that walks in and says, hey, I'm looking for something to do. I do this all the time. I go into strange communities all the time and I ask that question. And the number one answer I get when I ask what's fun to do around here is nothing. That is not a way to market your town, right? So unless we are actually feeding this positive narrative into these frontline employees, they're not going to have any narrative but their own. And when you've got people that may even, you know, you've got kids growing up in households that are filled with a negative narrative, that there's nothing here for you, our best days are behind us, you need to get out to be successful. If they're working at your gas station, that's what they're repeating. So anyway, I don't want to harp on that too much, but it's very vital for me to understand how is your community talked about at all these kind of contact points that you have with people that don't live here. So for me, it's also existing residents. You're going to hear from some of these folks. I want to lift up the voices of newcomers. Like it's one thing to say, well, Ben Winchester came in here and said there was all these great things happening, but I just don't believe it. Well, we got a panel of people who are ready to talk all about what a great experience they had. They're coming up just next. So again, media, Facebook, Google Ads, all of these are ways to invite people into your community. How do you really actually welcome people in then? Talk to your real estate agents. They know everybody who just moved in. Your property managers knows everybody who just rented. Your city clerks know everybody who just bought a property and have to hook up their water. So we have programs that we advocate for, like Grab a Bite, which is taking newcomers out for meals. It's very simple. Once you find a new person, take them out for a meal. The only rule we've got a bunch of Grab a Bite programs here. And the only rule we've got is the Ben Winchester rule, which is you can't ask them for anything. Not like, oh, we've got a spot on our board. Would you want to sit on that? Like, don't do that. That is a quick way to turn people off because you really don't know them yet. Another one is a newcomer supper. And we call it the best $150 ever spent. And it is a supper. It probably costs more than that, but you know, yeah, right? But it is a supper for newcomers only. It's not a supper where all the existing residents kind of could stand around and gawk at all the new people. It is literally only for the newcomers. And the number one outcome out of this is newcomers saying, oh my gosh, I can't believe how many other new people there are. Because do you want to know how lonely it is for their first year? It's a challenge. Any ways that you can have in your position as a leader and a concerned resident for your community to help make this experience better, please do it. Do not be afraid to say hello and invite people out. And then when we involve people, again, trying to recognize that people are involved regionally, but really it starts with a small request. So again, not just like, hey, do you want to sit on our Eagles board? It is more like, hey, we're going to flip burgers for the firemen on Friday night. Do you want to help us out? Like, oh, sure, that sounds great, right? But at the same time, we need to make room for these newcomers to leave their own marks on our groups and our communities. So instead of like, this literally happened to me, like I got invited to join the Lions. It wasn't an invitation. It was, are you ready to join the Lions? And like, there's no answer I can give there besides yes, right? So I got the yellow coat and I go to the meetings and it's literally like, well, here's the 5 things we do every year. Which one are you going to sign up for? I don't know, collect eyeglasses. Like, I don't know. Like, it was just, I had so little connection to the group. The guys were great, but I wasn't married or had kids at the time. So meanwhile, looking at leadership development programs too would be important for involving people long-term. So where does this narrative matter? For me, the narrative matters most because who are your number one audience for a negative narrative in town? Are your kids. These are my kids. They know what this means. When your kids hear nothing but the narrative of doom and gloom and decline and need to get out, succeed, they're never going to come back. They're never going to see your place as a viable place for them to return to, whether or not that's true or not. So the bottom line is people are moving in, they're building their community, they're diversifying the community, they're buying the economy, they're buying and starting businesses, some are working from home, they're living in this region. Like, people are choosing to move to your small towns today. So if you have a negative narrative, I want to remind you that in the thousands of interviews and focus groups and surveys I've done, nobody ever says they're moving to your town for pity. Like, oh, you know, Hancock, I know you lost your grocery store 26 years ago, but I'm going to move here today to help you out. Like, nobody ever says that, right? People are moving today to your small towns for what you are today and tomorrow, not what may have been. So really, for me, rural revitalization has been upon us and is upon us today. That's what I've got for you all today. If you guys need any citations, if you guys want to know more about some of the research, we've got a whole landing page called the Brain Gain landing page. If you're on Reddit, we've got a subreddit. We do a Rural Issues and Trends webinar series that's going to be postponed for a little bit until the winter, but if you want to sign up for it, feel free to do that. But really, again, thanks to Jim and Kathy and really everybody, you all, for being so passionate about your community that you are on the forefront of better understanding how to build your community for this future generation. So now, with that, we are going to have a panel discussion. As I mentioned, a lot of times people are like, well, I don't believe what Ben Winchester is saying. So here we've got 4 folks here today that are willing to open themselves up and talk about the experience that they had before and after the move. So I'm not quite sure because we're on Zoom. It's hard to look over and see exactly who is here. So I just want to have each of them introduce themselves and say, you know, when did you move here? How many years ago? Who did you move with? And what do you do? More briefly. So Jonathan, we'll start with you.
Yeah, so I moved here in 2013 to the Northwoods with my wife, Erin, and our daughter, Noelle, who was 4 at the time. And since then, we welcomed a son, James, who's now 3. And I've worked remotely since 2008. So I'm a software developer.
Thanks. Carrie Jo.
Hi, I moved to the Northwoods in 2007. I lived in Oneida County in Rhinelander and then moved to Vilas County in 2015. When I first moved to Rhinelander, I moved to be a teacher there. I was by myself. And then when I moved to Eagle River, I moved with my fiance to the Northwoods area a little bit further north. So I'm currently the Director of Teaching and Learning here at the Northland Pines School District.
Perfect, thank you. Lizeth.
I moved up here to Eagle River in February. That's this year. I moved with my husband. And I'm an esthetician, and I own a spa in Eagle River.
Thanks. Ruby and Brad.
Hi, we moved here in 2017. I'm a full-time mom. We have 10-month-old daughter, Sophia. We moved here from Portland, Oregon, and we own Sidecast.
Perfect.
And
Thank you.
I actually grew up here, but I did the same thing with the whole brain drain. I left right at 18, never looked back up until I met my wife, and we wanted to raise our family here.
Well, let's go right into that. So first and foremost, thank you to all the panelists for opening yourselves up tonight. We have personal questions, right? And it takes a lot to talk about, how this went and kind of the process that you went through with regards to moving to the community you ultimately end up choosing. Let's just follow up with you, Ruby and Brad. Like in the year before the move, or in the year and a half before the move, what kind of turned your attention to the area in the first place? What got you looking to move?
I'll take that one. So we lived out in Portland, Oregon, and we had a office right downtown. And in that office, it was a really beautiful office. We lived downtown. We really enjoyed all of the different amenities that the city provides. But at the same time, there was a park right in front of our office that was just continually getting more and more homeless people being inside that park at the same time when kids were in recess playing in the park. And it's just having grown up here and seeing that, we would go for a walk in a park, and it wasn't as family friendly as we had hoped. And so that really got us thinking about it. And so that was kind of the catalyst. And it really helps that we can work from wherever. We have an office here, but we can work wherever we have internet. So that helped as well.
Great, thank you. Lizeth, same question. In the year before the move, kind of what turned your attention to thinking about moving, and then what turned your attention to the region?
Well, my husband actually grew up here, so he always looked for a place that was kind of rural. When the bills started piling up, like down in California, everything's so expensive. It's just, we needed to make a change. So we decided that we would move up north. We weren't really sure where, but ultimately we ended up deciding to be close to his family. And that's pretty much it.
Were there any were there any more kind of push factors there that kind of got you away?
It's just like trying to live more of a quiet life and more of a safer community, and also being able to buy a home. We couldn't see ourselves buying a home down in California, but over here prices are more accessible.
Great, thanks, thank you. Carrie Jo, same question. In the year before the move, what turned your attention to even think about moving, and then what turned your attention to this region?
I had an adventurous spirit when I was in college and enjoyed traveling and wanted to go into the big city. So I did some teaching abroad. I went to Manchester, England, and came back home. I grew up around Anigo and Merrill, was where I graduated from, so not too far from the Northwoods, but didn't see myself coming back to that region specifically, but absolutely missed like going out on the water and the lakes and just the environmental factors and the really the parts of life that I enjoy and the activities that I enjoy doing. That was something that was missing, and until it was gone, I hadn't quite realized how much I missed that. So I received a teaching job in Rhinelander and was really excited to take that and move back to the area and be a little bit closer to my family. Then when I got engaged, and then when I had my first child, who's now 4, the move to Eagle River was definitely the right move. It was a move where I had a professional opportunity here in the Northland Pines School District, but really was looking forward to having my daughter grow up somewhere where she can appreciate the outdoors, like it was mentioned before, just the peacefulness, kind of that simple life, and really a good high quality school system and lots of things that I'm really, really proud of. So I hadn't, when I first left when I was 18, anticipated, coming back, but really truly at heart, the activities and the philosophies and what I live by, I came to the realization that this is where I wanted to raise my family.
Great, thank you, Carrie Jo. Jonathan, same question. The year before your move, what made you think about moving, and then what made you consider the region?
Yeah, so my wife and I both really had a passion for the rural lifestyle, and our previous place to moving up here was in Omaha, Nebraska. And our daughter was born, and we had no family locally, so we were looking to move closer to family, and my wife grew up here, so she has family here still. And my family is kind of spread out, but more or less in the Illinois area. And just the pull to not be close to Chicago at all and the beauty of the Northwoods kind of won us over. And so that's where we ended up picking up here in the Northwoods.
Quick question for each of you, and answer if you can. Did any of you consider moving somewhere else?
I did. We did. We were thinking of New Mexico. We were thinking of Arizona, Idaho. So, yeah.
Others, Carrie Jo, Jonathan, Liza?
I had considered going towards the Elk Mound, Eau Claire area. I have some other family that way, which is also a rural community, but quite a bit different type of a rural community than here. So ultimately chose the lakes and the forests, and yeah, that was part of our decision-making factors.
Yeah, ours was, we had considered other places in Chicago or in Colorado actually, too, but ultimately the main thing that we were looking for is to be close to family. And so that narrowed things down quite a bit. And we wanted to be within a short distance to be able to have a very active relationship with our family. So we ended up moving across the street when we first moved up here, which that's a whole nother story in itself.
Okay. Great, thank you. So Jonathan, we'll just follow up with you here. After you made the move in the first year, how did it go? How did the first year go?
Well, so we moved up here, and because of some challenges with housing and everything else, more or less we spent the first 11 months in my in-laws' basement. And then we ultimately ended up buying the house across the street. And so the first year actually went really well. We still have a very positive relationship. We still care very much for each other. But it was a challenge coming up into this area, and the housing was a big challenge for us.
Carrie Jo, same question. The first year, how did it go?
I would say overall it went well. Two different experiences when I first moved up to the Northwoods from some of the travel and things, and I was by myself. I had a really good network of colleagues, and I was able to meet people, and I tried staying as involved and active in the community just to be able to have some of those connections and things. And then when I moved up into Eagle River with my fiance, again in 2015, that year went well as well, but I was in a different point in my life. And I really was busy with my job and just kind of learning the ropes, and again, kind of meeting people in the community and connecting with people that also had children or were interested in the same activities and events. I would say just because I was personally probably a little bit more busy and learning a lot more in my new job, I probably didn't get as involved in that first year as I would like to. And so it's been a couple-year journey to do that. And I feel like now I'm in a really good place where I'm starting to meet some people, have some, that have the same interests and some connectivity again outside of work. So it's been good, and kind of that up and down, battle, just like anything else, where you go through those phases, but in the end it's worked out great, and absolutely no regrets.
That's super. Thank you. Liza, same question. How did your first year go?
How's it going still? It hasn't been a year yet, but it's kind of interesting because we moved like right before the pandemic hit, and we moved into our my in-laws cabin. It's like in the end of the street, so we were already quite, I mean, my husband worked from home even before the pandemic. The only thing that the pandemic really screwed up there was that I could not work. I actually got my Wisconsin license in March when everything started closing. But I mean, after the restriction was off, I've been quite pleasantly surprised of the support that I've had, because like even without having friends, I mean, I just had my in-laws and my husband, who I just moved here with. It's surprising to me that I was able to open a business, and I just opened in July, and I'm already having clients, versus the struggle that I was having to even get clients in California. And the help, just, I mean, Kathy has been amazing there, pointing me in the right direction. So it's been a couple of months, and it's been pretty surprisingly well. And also people have been really nice, because they as soon as they know what I do, they're like, oh, you should meet this other person. So it's been very, very welcoming. So
Super, thank you. Brad and Ruby, same question. The first year, how did it go?
Well, the first year it was very challenging for sure. One of the primary reasons is I really missed the tech scene. So we had to go to either Chicago or Madison to get connected in person with some of the community, the technology community. And then the other thing is the dance. And so I ended up starting a dance social here, but it was like one of my outlets before, and swimming. And so some of those amenities, I guess, that I missed from like living in the city. But yeah, definitely very thankful being here to the abundance of lakes. So.
And to add on to that, we're probably in Jonathan's boat, where we couldn't find housing. And so we lived with my brother for a while, and, he's a really nice guy, but, you kind of want to live on your own, especially when you're in your 30s. So that was kind of rough. We really couldn't find a place to live right away. But once we did, it really opened it up. And then the other thing was we were lucky enough for the fact that I had high school friends that were still in town. Mm-hmm. And I can't imagine what people that don't have any friends here, because a lot of the stuff that happens is all word of mouth. It's so hard to find events and things that are happening. And so like just by having those connections where they might text you, hey, do you want to go here? Versus like, trying to listen to the radio at the right moment to hear the calendar of events, so that was a really big thing too. And that was really helpful. But for the most part, once we did get settled in, and especially now that we have our baby, like it's the social stuff kind of went out the window anyway, and add on to it with the pandemic and all this stuff. So I think, we ended up in a good situation for sure. Yeah. Yeah. We made our friend, and our friend's now 10 months old. So.
That's great. We'll just continue on with you two. Do you see yourself here in 5 years, or what would happen that you wouldn't see yourself here in 5 years?
Yeah, I think we made a conscious, it was planned, all planned for. It was our primary reason for moving early was to get involved so we can help create like the infrastructure for our offsprings. So we definitely plan on sticking around.
And yeah, so from like a business standpoint as well, there's so much opportunity. We're capitalists at heart. And so there's so much different things that we're going to be able to do over the upcoming years that in the city, if you open one business that might be somewhat unique, there's probably 5 other businesses exactly like that. Up here, there's hardly anything even remotely close. So when it comes to the opportunities to succeed, there's just so much more of a blue ocean in a place like this. So that's another big aspect. And quite frankly, the school system is really good from the infrastructure standpoint, the amount of students per teacher ratios, all of those kind of things that you don't get unless you go to a private school, which then, without going down a rabbit hole, there's a whole nother problem with. And so like, it's just a great place to raise a family. So that's where we'll be sticking around.
Super, thank you. Liza, same question. Do you see yourself here in 5 years, or what could possibly happen that would not allow that?
I think so. Especially since I'm building a business here, and I agree completely with Brad in the fact that there's so much opportunity. I was quite surprised to not find where I wanted to work exactly. And happy enough to be blessed to be able to open my own thing, but it is very, very unique. Yeah, there's a lot of opportunity to make your own thing. There's a lot of things that I miss from the city, like food-wise and all of that I'm pretty sure that if someone comes and implements it here, it could be very welcomed.
Great, thank you. Carrie Jo, same question. Do you see yourself here in 5 years? What could possibly mitigate that if it were not to happen?
Yeah, I definitely do see myself here in 5 years. I'm happy to hear the positive comments just in regards to the school districts in the area and things. Definitely at work, we're creating 5-year plans, and I'm involved in a state project that's looking long-term, and I'm really excited about the work that's ahead, and really just thrilled to be a part of it and a part of this community and help build that, and some programming that's happening, and inclusive practices, and all sorts of really good things happening in the school that I want to be a part of, and I want my daughter to also experience as she goes into school and is entering 4K already this year, which is completely crazy. So my family feels settled. We're in a really, really good place. We're happy where we're living, and just bought a house a couple years ago that I can't imagine moving out of, and the area itself. So yeah, definitely, I can't foresee anything right now that would cause me to think differently or to think that I, perhaps wouldn't be living here in 5 years. There's nothing that stands out to me. I definitely 100% foresee us staying in the Eagle River area.
Great, thank you. Jonathan, same question to you. Do you see yourself here in 5 years?
Yeah, I think I echo a lot of the sentiment what everyone else has said. I think we very much do see ourselves here 5 years and even much longer than that. We can't foretell what the future is going to hold, so there's always things that can come from left field. But overall, it really fits our family. It's where we want to continue to raise our kids, and so we don't have any desire to move.
Great, yeah. So I just want to let folks know there will be time for you to ask questions. If you would like to put those questions into chat, that can help expedite this when we've got time. So next question we've got for the panel here is, what would you say to folks just moving into town? What would you say to them, Jonathan?
I would say make an effort, and this has come up already a little bit, but make an effort to understand the local culture. There's a lot of local events and festivals and things like that that will help you understand what the Northwoods is all about and the things important to the Northwoods. Again, it's kind of hard to find some of these events, but overall, really try to connect at that level first.
Great, Carrie Jo, same question. What would you say to me if I just moved in?
Yeah, I think that he just did a really good job explaining that. That's exactly it. Just trying to get involved. That gives you the opportunity to meet people and people that have similar interests than you, and you go to activities or events that you'll meet people, and you'll be able to have that connectivity to the community, and you'll also get to embrace and understand the local culture by involving yourself and doing those things. So take a chance, take a risk, and be willing to do that and expand your horizons, and it'll definitely be worthwhile.
Thank you. Lizette, same question. What do you say to a new mover?
There's so much to do. It's surprising how much there is to do in small town. there's also a lot of opportunities, and the air quality, I know not everyone talks about, but I do definitely appreciate that. Even the clouds look different. And it's beautiful. People are nice. There's so much to do. And honestly, a lot of things that some people might miss from the city, you can pretty much have access to a lot of the things that you need. So that you're not missing that much, and you can always visit the city.
Right. Thank you. Ruby and Brad, same question to you. What do you say to folks that just moved in?
What were you thinking? Just kidding. No. Yeah. I think when people move here, it's really that social aspect, and that you really got to start getting engaged. And when folks move here, it creates a sense of stewardship where they actually want to participate in things. And that's something that I've really noticed, even with us, like when we're out in Portland, we didn't really, we were part of like the startup scene, and we're doing certain things inside of the bigger ecosystem. But when we're here, we really got involved deeply with a lot of different organizations, and we really tried to help from a grassroots style. And so it's really nice when people move here that they get involved with the community.
Super. And this is going to be kind of related, but what would you say to local community leaders to help ease the transition? So when we can affect structures that are meeting with people or talking to people, what would you say to community leaders to help ease the transition of new people into your community? We'll start right back with you, Jonathan, or sorry, with Ruby and Brad. Sorry.
One of the things I would suggest is to create a better onboarding experience for the newcomers, and also the targeted demographics whom you want to move here, because the easier it is for them to move here, the better. You talked about who do I call when the pipe broke, things like that. There's simple things like that, and then also highlight the abundance of water that we have here. For instance, there's so much this area has so much to offer, and that's pretty much it.
Yeah. She speaks for
Okay. Yeah, just feel free to jump in.
I'll just add on. I'll add on to that though, where a welcome committee would be so helpful. Where, like I said, I knew people here already. It wasn't people that I had talked to for a decade or more, but through Facebook or whatever, I reached out to them. Hey, I see that you're in town. What's going on? And it was just an easy, an on-ramp that was much easier. But for people that don't know anybody here, there's got to be some sort of welcoming committee. And your prior suggestions of having the newbie lunch, or bringing them out, or any of those things, those would be really helpful for the folks here.
Great. Lizette, same question to you. How can community leaders help ease this transition for newcomers?
I think the online presence of activities, businesses, what is offered to the new people is not all that it could be, because I experienced that I wanted to know, where do I take my clothes for dry cleaning? I honestly still don't know if anybody knows, but I do. The access to the information, the businesses are not online. It's again all word of mouth. I think the presence online would help a lot.
Super, thank you. Carrie Jo, same question.
A company that could help with that.
Carrie Jo.
Yeah, I agree with everything that's been said. And I also think just the more we can push out and highlight those local events that are occurring, that would be popular ways that people could go out in the community, I think would be, really valuable and really, really important. So just ensuring that we're advertising and getting those local events and local things out to everybody in addition to everything that's already been been stated, and just, housing, helping people connect to housing, and really, as we also notice that here in the school district, if we have new staff that come in, that finding a place to live or a place to rent, especially renting, is definitely very challenging. So the more that we can provide options and get that information, I guess, out to people, the better.
Perfect. Jonathan, same question. What would you say to community leaders to help ease the transition of new people in?
Yeah, I would say make it as simple as possible with a single phone number or email address that you can send any question to. So a lot of large enterprises, for example, have like an employee resource center, and it's just one email and you can send any question, whether it's related to your healthcare benefits or who's on this project, and it gets processed in a queue. And so the same thing, just a single point of contact for any question, from can you recommend the mechanic to, how do I get my water turned on and hooked up? I think that'd be a huge help. You're on mute.
Oh my gosh, thank you. It's been a long day. So I'll just keep going right with you here, Jonathan. What would you say to the current class of high school students if you're up on the stage in front of them? What are you going to say to them about moving here, living here?
Yeah, I would say that there are so many opportunities in the technology field. I work in tech, so I'm familiar, and it's a passion of mine. But you can take a high-tech field and connect it to another passion. So for example, if you really care about snowmobiling and outdoor sports and racing and competition, you can take something in the tech industry that's computer related and really mix those two. And so that's something that's huge benefit to the local area. So you really can bring a job with you and connect, modern tech with your kind of family legacy of outdoor passions.
Great, thank you. Carrie Jo, you're in the school district, so I mean, it would be kind of fascinating just to have a conversation with you just about how are our students describing the communities? What are their view of the future, right? So what are you hearing? So not just, I'll pick your brain just a little bit more in terms of what would you say to the kids, but what are you hearing too?
The kids definitely, they do appreciate the Northwoods and what we have to offer. And I do hear a lot that they have a lot of opportunity in different clubs, and they're really appreciative of the choice that the school district provides. So there's different learning options.
Just a minute.
Lots of different classes and lots of different things that not all rural schools can provide those opportunities. There's some really authentic learning experiences out in the community. And we really pride ourselves on options and being a school district that provides choices for students. And I do hear from the kids in high school that they really very much appreciate that, and they start to recognize that they have some say in their direction, and they can go out and experience something, and that feels really good, or it helps them kind of find their place in who they are. I think the challenges sometimes are just the diversity maybe in some of the cultural aspects in students as they're trying to figure out who they are and the path that they want to have, and maybe, being in a smaller community, sometimes we just have to really work hard to bring that in to kids so that they still have all of those similar experiences or learn all various different perspectives and aspects. And we have it. It's just a matter of, embracing what we have and moving forward that way. But sometimes that, I would say, is something that they may talk about or bring up when they're at the lunch table, even honestly, or you walk through there and they're, talking about all kinds of things out in the world. And just getting kids out, I think, too, getting them those field trips and experiences, even at the young ages. There are some kids that unfortunately don't leave our area very often, so they don't have a lot of maybe background in other places and things. So the more we can provide all of those experiences and make that learning experience comprehensive and authentic, I think is really important and appreciated. And it's been a really long day. I think I just talked in one really big circle, so hopefully that all just made a lot of sense. But
yeah. No, it definitely did.
So,
yeah, right.
You're with me.
No, that's great. I mean, again, you're able to hear even some of these words on the ground where, geez, my kids won't even tell me stuff, so you're able to kind of hear this as you're walking by. Liza, same question. What are you going to say to high school kids today?
Yeah, what Carrie was saying, I was just kind of connecting with what I'm thinking, because the comments that I've heard about living here is like, no, you have to get out and learn about the world, and then you can come back, you know. But I think in education is an investment, and at that age, we don't really know what we want to do for the rest of our lives. So I think if they could understand more of what they want to give to the world, and then figure out how to make that into their job, and then study that, you know, that would be more beneficial to their own fulfillment in life than just picking a college and see what is out there, and then, you know, they just go.
Great, thank you. Brad and Ruby, same question. What are you gonna say to high school kids, or what are you gonna say to your kids when they graduate? Like, I'm sure you'll have a positive narrative in your house, but if you're talking to their friends, what would you say to them?
Our kids are never leaving, so.
I love talking to high school kids. But what I would say is, like, regardless of which industry they decide to pursue, learn how to work with technology, because it's going to be an integral part of their lives. And also learn about how the business works in that industry. I think staying curious in how things work is a lifelong project, or the curiosity just needs to be fostered.
Right.
Considering I'm one of the folks that has grown up here and left, you know, I can't see myself being who I am had I not left. I don't know who I'd be, you know, and so I'm very, very grateful for, I traveled a bunch, I lived in many different places, and, you know, I don't know what I could tell to younger people, because everyone's different and everyone's situation is unique, everyone's passion is different, and so, you know, it's really hard to say, but personally, I am very happy I left for a little while. You know, it's the amount of experiences that I gained by living in these different startup hubs that I did over the past 10 years or so, like before moving here, is invaluable. And now coming here, you know, just even our office, for example, like our office is a culmination of many different coffee shops I've worked in, many places that Ruby's been all over the world. And it's just all of those different ideas that kind of plant that seed in your head as you see different experiences, you can then bring back to your community. And so while younger folks should go out and travel or live somewhere else for a little while, I think at the end of the day, they should come back to, you know, a place like this and bring all of that experience with them. And it's like the rising tide raises all ships. So like if people start coming back with all these unique ideas, it really starts to create a ecosystem of creativity that would typically not be found in a smaller area.
Great, thank you. This next question is going to be a little bit more geared toward diversity. You know, Minnesota is very similar outside of regional centers. There are meat processing plants and metropolitan areas. It looks fairly white. And it's usually described as an end result, as if it's white for a reason, as opposed to, remember my earlier statistic that 40% of our homes are owned by people over the age of 75. It's hard to welcome in diversity when there's nowhere for them to live. But that said, what would you say to a person of color who may be anxious about moving to a rural community or a small town? What are you going to say to them, Ruby and Brad?
I'm here, and they're very welcoming.
We're a very unique couple. I grew up on the reservation. She grew up in the Philippines. So it's...
Dave is the first person who greeted me in my native language.
But yeah, that I can see how it is an issue. You know, there is a struggle with the cultural aspect, but you know, I think the world's rapidly changing, especially with the remote work, where we're just in this weird transition period where it hasn't fully transitioned over yet. And there's a lot of people holding on to what they used to think the world was like. And so, you know, I think in the next 5-10 years, the the world's going to change a lot for the better.
Thanks. Liza, same question. What would you say to a person of color that's saying, well, maybe I could live there. I'm not sure. I'm not sure. What would you say to them?
Well, I haven't seen much people of color here, and the ones that I've seen, I don't know if they're tourists or not, but I'm from Mexico, and it's been not an issue. Like before all the Black Lives Matters, it was all the Mexicans getting separated from the family. So I don't know. The people have been quite nice and so welcoming that I feel like they wouldn't have a problem here. I just don't see that happening, but that's just because my experience has been so pleasant.
Right.
Yeah, and again, I do agree with Brad. The world is changing to be more of accepting of differences, and it's just, I don't know. That's something that I really don't really think of much, because honestly, I personally have had a pleasant experience.
Right. I tend to hear this, and I ask this question especially just so y'all know, because there is a tension there between advocating for local culture and advocating for, are we the melting pot or are we a stew? And kind of which way are we viewing this welcoming new people in? Like, do you hear like they just need to learn how we do it around here, or they're really bringing something to the table? Like, I think there are competing viewpoints on this. So this is just a little more background exactly why I'm asking that. So thank you. Carrie Jo, same question.
Yeah, I think that the term community just really stands out. It's not just a place to live, but it's a true community all the way around. And I think the support, is there. I see kids all the time embracing culture. If there's a new student and it is a student of color and we don't have that many, like I never have come across a situation personally where I felt like that's been an issue, or that person's not been accepted. And I agree with the world, just changing and accepting adversity, and we're really moving forward in the right direction.
Great, thank you, Carrie Jo. Jonathan, same question.
Yeah, I would say welcome, come and be part of our community. When we moved up here in 2013, shortly thereafter, actually had neighbors that moved here from Kenya, and they're still up here. And it's been a great relationship and a positive experience all around. So I would say come and be miserable during winter like the rest of us.
Miserable. Oh, it's so much fun in winter. Anyway, thank you. So I think the last formal question I've got for you, and again, folks, if you've got a question, go ahead and put them in chat. But the last question I've got, just briefly, like at what point did you think like, I'm a part of this community now? Sorry, Jonathan, we'll start with you.
Yeah, I think we found every place we've lived, it's really taken 5 to 7 years before we felt like this was home. And I don't know what specifically that is in terms of that time period. It felt warm and welcoming much before that 5 years, but it seems to be that's the amount of time it takes for people to realize that you're really committed to this area, you're really staying, you're not going to pick up and move somewhere else in a short period of time. And so it's taken that, and we've been here now 8 years about, so this is very much home for us now.
Great, thank you. Carrie Jo, same question. Do you feel like this is your community now? And if so, at what point did you feel that?
I do. I was thinking when you first asked the question, the number that popped in my brain was 2 years. And I think that just comes from like that point of feeling settled when I first moved, and there's just a lot going on and you're trying to figure out a lot of unknown. And when I felt like I was more to the point where I had built some relationships with others, and I was just settled personally, professionally, like all of those pieces started to kind of sift down and settle, and I could truly feel like that sense of involvement. And yeah, I would, if that makes sense. But so I'd say just that 2 year time frame, and giving myself some time to get into that place where I felt settled and able to really go to the events and feel a part of the community and really feel that connection.
Super, thank you. Lizette, same question. At what point, if you feel that way, do you feel part of the community yet?
Yeah, I think I'm on my way to feel like truly feel part of the community. But honestly, when I felt like this was like, oh, I'm staying, is when I got my driver's license from Wisconsin. But yeah, I'm still on the way, and I think as I build relationships, I will feel more at home here.
That's great. Love it. Love it. Jonathan, same question. Do you feel, and if not, why not? But if so, at what point did you feel like you were really part of the community here?
I think, did you mean Brad?
Oh yeah, sorry. Going down my list the wrong way. Ruby and Brad, my apologies. Sorry.
I think at the point when I started teaching dance and then mentoring kids and also meeting my mentors, also helping the local entities get visibility here in the Northwoods and beyond. I think those are the times when I felt like I was part of the community, and also having the opportunity to serve for Nicolay College as a board of trustee for a year.
I know I felt welcome when I went into the bar over here and everyone screamed my name like Norm and Cheers. But no, I don't go to bars. Just kidding. No, it's having grown up here, it was still kind of a transition period for me, because when I was younger, I didn't really appreciate this area as much. You know, like we'd go out on the boat and we'd see all these colorful leaves and all these things that we have now. But as a kid, it's just like, oh, it's just part of, you know, part of what the world is. And so it was really a nice transition period where when we started traveling around, like going on road trips, I mean, like, you know, even 40 miles away and just seeing some nice things. And it really, I felt like home, because when I did that when I was younger, it was just like, oh, we have to go to this other town. Like it's 30 minutes. I didn't want to do that. It was such a different dynamic than now. It's like, oh, we get to go to Eagle River, you know, like that's a beautiful drive. And so it's such a different experience now. And, you know, for us personally, we've been helping a lot of businesses with our company Sightcast. And what we found is as we help more and more businesses, the word is spreading, and it's a really nice experience to be part of the community. When we when we first were in Walmart, we saw someone that we knew, and I was like, no. And then we went down another aisle. Like I didn't want to talk to them. And it was just like I was such in the city mode where I didn't want to talk to anybody. But now when I'm so used to being able to say hi right away instead of just like trying to like go away. So it was a harsh, you know, transition getting back into this from like city mode, but I really appreciate it now.
Super, thank you. So we're open for questions now. I think I covered a diversity question that was of interest here. Missing cultural diversity. I don't know. Otherwise, if anybody would like to unmute themselves, Kathy, Jim, if you've got a question too, feel free to jump in here. Our formal questioning is done. So we'll open the mics up. Or if there are any other comments our panelists would like to make, please feel free.
I just want to say I gotta meet Ruby. You and I need to connect, Ruby.
I agree.
Dance, because of dance, but we'll connect later.
I'll be more than happy to teach everyone.
Well, and this is Kathy, and I think that what just happened between Lizette and Brad and Ruby is just what we're hoping for. And Ben, it's your whole message, right? So it's the, even right now, the Vilas County Economic Development being a catalyst to provide an opportunity for newcomers to come and meet each other. And this is just one start of that. And so we hope even tonight, this has been an opportunity for all of you to get to know each other and stay connected, and we can link you up with each other on email or whatever. But I think this is the start of something larger where we can even grow this and grow that newcomer base and have those luncheons. And I'm thrilled with the conversation. I'm thrilled with the comments. Ben, you were a fabulous presenter and facilitator. So just my 2 cents, and our board chairman, Jim Tuckwell, any comments from you?
No, likewise. I think this has been really excellent. I really appreciate the personal perspectives from the panel. I think it's been very important to have you here to I mean, Ben pointed it out earlier, but to share your real world perspectives as to what it's really like to move. So, you know, likewise, my wife and I grew up here and left for a long time, came back when we were in our mid-50s. Didn't come back as soon because it wasn't realistic. But again, I worked remotely for 10 years before I retired. But having grown up here was a little bit different in terms of transition for us. So it's been very interesting and eye-opening for me to hear about, you know, all of your transitions. And like Kathy, I see this as the beginning of a longer-term initiative that we've talked about how we can help build the community. This is a step in that. We'll work on doing more of this kind of thing.
Great, thank you. Well, to the panelists, Jonathan, Carrie Jo, Lizeth, Ruby, and Brad, thank you for opening yourselves up tonight and for providing some really honest and clear answers with regards to the transition you made to your new home. So again, just want to, I know we can't officially do it, but I'd like to have a round of applause for our panelists. Thank you. So with that, I think that's the end of our program. I'll turn it back over to Kathy and Jim here, but just really appreciate all your time here today, all your dedication, energy to your community, and really all the passion that you've got for ensuring that you've got a future for people to live here in respectful ways. So thanks to Kathy and Jim for bringing me here and allowing me to share my story of where I've been in my research, and just kudos to you all for the hard work you've done. Thank you.
So Ben, thank you again. And we have recorded this session, so we will be putting it up on our website. So please do share it with your family and friends and colleagues. So once that's up and running, we'll get an email out to everybody. And I can't thank you enough. This has been fabulous. I have truly enjoyed the journey of meeting all of you. And I know there's more great things to come. So Jim, you want to close us out?
Sure. And just to everybody that's still here, remember the Vilas County Economic Development Corporation is here to help. Remember, we've got a wealth of experience and knowledge in a whole variety of different aspects of business. And we're here to help. And we don't charge for the support that we offer. So if you or anybody you know in business or wants to start a business or is working remotely, we'd really also like to build a community of remote workers. Please let us know. Please let them know that they should get in touch with us because we're here to help. And so thank you very much.
Thank you, everyone. Have a good evening.
Good night. Have a good evening. Thanks for joining.